Hare Krishna. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. To speak about, today we will speak about Kashishwara Pandit and Bhugarbha Goswami, two very, very exalted devotees in our line, acharyas in our line. I'd like to say thank you first to the GBC SPT group for arranging these really wonderful Kartik classes. It's just great. Every day is more nectar. So thank you very much. And my obeisances, vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhuvyeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namne Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskacha Desatarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Giradhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll begin with Kashishwara Pandit first. Unfortunately, there's not a lot known about him, especially from his youth. We do know that he was born in a village called Chhatara, near Calcutta, very close to Calcutta, in the district of Hooghly, and that his father, Vasudev Bhattacharya, was from a very exalted Brahmin Vatsya Gotra lineage. Now, apparently that's a very exalted lineage. From what I can understand, the Gotras are, the different lineages that come down from various sages that are connected to different branches of the Vedas. So it's very interesting and wonderful to be part of one of these lineages that have been coming down from time immemorial. So in short, we know that Kashishvara came from a very elevated Vaisnava family. And Prabhupada mentions in a purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Kashishvara Pandit established in this town, this Chhatara village, he established deities of Gauranga and Sri Radha Govinda, and that later Kashishvara's nephew, Rudra Pandit, became the priest. And their descendants have continued to take care of those deities of Kashishwara Pandit in that village up until this day. And Srila Prabhupada also said that sometimes, as a householder, he used to go there for prasadam at midday. And he said the deities are very beautiful. And he also mentioned that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur visited this temple. It was a place where it was known that there were a lot of big festivals. But Prabhupada also mentions that unfortunately, much of the land that belonged to the deities has been sold, and so that has hampered the worship of the deities and the festivals that they have had through the ages. And it's an interesting point because this is a system from long ago that when a deity was established, they would also own the land. They would have land where the service would be taken care of, where you would grow the vegetables and things, where the boga would come from, where the flowers would come from, so that when you establish a deity, you know that you have everything that's required for their seva. And practically all of Vrindavan was owned by the different Vrindavan deities. Like where I'm staying right now, if you come down the lane, you see a little sign and it says Radha Raman Bagicha. And Bagicha means a garden. So, this is certainly not a garden. It's a big apartment building that I live in here, and it's surrounded by buildings. But this previously would have been one of Radharaman's gardens, So, this happens, this goes on. So much of the land of the deities in Vrindavan, of course, has been sold. And so that does hamper the deity worship. And that's something that Srila Prabhupada thought about. That's why he actually established the Mayapur Vrindavan Trust, the MVT. That was a trust that was built so that the deities would be taken care of in case there's any shortage or difficulty. So these are important things to think about. It's our responsibility over, the next generations and generations to come. How will these deities of Srila Prabhupada be cared for? And it would be wonderful if each of them could have, some land. That's probably a little more difficult in the West, but in Mayapur, of course, they have that. They have the gardens, they have the vegetable gardens and things for the service of the deities. So, just an important point. So, apart from that, we don't know so much more about his actual growing up. Most everyone will know or be familiar with Kashishwara Pandit as the personal servant of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his Jagannath Puri Leela. But not so many people know that actually he was there in Navadvip also. How he came there or why he came there, perhaps for education, it's hard to say. But it is known that he was there and took part in the kirtans at Srivasangam. And he would go with Mahaprabhu to bathe in the Ganges. And it's in Chaitanya Bhagavad, it's mentioned that he was there, Kashishwara was there, with Mahaprabhu when he went to Sridhar's house and drank from his iron pot. And Vrindavan Das Thakur mentions there that Kasisvara Pandita was so dear to Mahaprabhu that he refers to him as being in the heart of Lord Chaitanya. Kashishwara Prandan. So, very, very dear. So as he was Mahaprabhu's godbrother, being a disciple of Ishwara Puri, as well as Govinda. And he received tremendous mercy from Ishwara Puri. He was his personal servant and with him day and night. I don't know exactly how long, but it appears that it was a very long period of time, right up until his departure from this world. And just before he departed the world, he instructed both Kashishwara and Govinda that when I'm gone, you go and you serve Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so they took that to heart, of course, the last instruction of their spiritual master. And when he, first Govinda arrived in Jagannath Puri. Kashishwara did a little pilgrimage before he came. But when both of them arrived, they were received with great respect and care and attention by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he provided them with a place to stay and everything that they needed and honored them. So just see how Mahaprabhu was setting the example for all Vaishnavas, how to receive guests, seniors, or anyone for that matter, with great care and attention and respect, and to provide them and to be careful to provide them their needs. So good lesson there for all of us. But when Govinda and Kashishwara arrived and they offered their service to Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu was in a quandary. He went to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya because he didn't know what to do. The Lord didn't know what to do, so he's asking his devotee. And he said to Sarvabhauma that, the servant of my spiritual master is my superior. How can I accept service from them? But it would be an offense if I don't follow the order of my spiritual master. So what shall I do? So then Sarvabhauma said very clearly the order of the Guru takes precedence over the rules of etiquette. So it was very clear that he should go ahead and do that. There's so many examples in which this principle is shown that, well, let's see, the example of Govinda himself when he was serving Mahaprabhu. After one kirtan, Mahaprabhu was so tired after kirtan, he laid down right in front of the door. And so Kashishwara was meant to come and massage his feet, but he didn't. Normally you wouldn't step over the body of the spiritual master. It's not really proper etiquette. And but he thought, but I have to serve. I have to do my service. So he did step over, and then he continued to sit there. So then when Mahaprabhu awoke, he was, oh, why are you still here? Why didn't you go take prasad? And he said, well, I didn't want to step over your body. And so, well, you must have stepped over it when you came in. And he said, yes, but that was for service. So, but I couldn't step over it just for me to go take prasadam. So Mahaprabhu appreciated that. He understood, that it requires a little, it's not enough to just know the rules in devotional service. It requires discernment. And as Prabhupada used to say, it requires a little intelligence, to understand what is actually going to be pleasing to the spiritual master. It's not an automatic thing. It's not like, okay, there's these rules, we just follow this. It's personal. Everything is personal. Like, say for example, I'm not sure if this is a good example, but in the early days, there was a GBC in New York who married someone who they thought was actually the heiress to the Toyota fortune. I mean, she wasn't. She pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. But for some time, that's what people thought she was. And so she was married to the GBC there. And they were doing some very strange things, like offering things to the deities that really shouldn't. I mean, it was weird. It was very weird things. But, the devotees were like, well, I don't know, he's a GBC. And but then Prabhupada found out, and he said, why did no one say anything? This is not correct. This should not be done. Use your intelligence, We're like, well, he's the authority. So the point being is that we are not blind followers. We have systems that are meant to facilitate and help us in our service. We have etiquette, we have rules, but ultimately, it's very personal. How to serve the spiritual master in an appropriate way in any given time and circumstance, it may be very, very different, Then this principle was elaborated on more fully, because when Govinda came, this is, another right after that follows, that was a real example of this principle of what should and should not be done. So when Govinda arrived, Sarvabhauma went to Mahaprabhu and he said, why did Ishwara Puri keep a servant who was from a Sudra family? And so in the purport, Srila Prabhupada really gets into it. And he said Govinda actually came from what would be considered a Sudra family, but because he was initiated by Ishwara Puri, he was certainly a Brahmin. And so this question, well, why did this question come up to Sarvabhauma? Because according to Smriti Shastra, which gives, rules for directions for varnashram, it says that a Brahmin can't accept a disciple from lower castes, or otherwise he'll be contaminated. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied that his spiritual master, Ishwara Puri, was so empowered that he was as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As such, Ishwara Puri was the spiritual master of the whole world. He was not a servant of any mundane rule or regulation. An empowered spiritual master like, this is Srila Prabhupada's purport. I'm reading, I have that here. An empowered spiritual master like Ishwara Puri can bestow his mercy upon anyone, irrespective of caste or creed. The conclusion is that a spiritual master who is authorized and empowered by Krishna and his own guru should be considered as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. That is the verdict of Vishwanath Chakravarti, Saksad Hari. An authorized spiritual master is as good as Hari. As Hari is free to act as he likes, the empowered spiritual master is also free. As Hari is not subject to mundane rules and regulations, the spiritual master empowered by him is also not subject. According to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna Shakti Vinahi Tara Pravartana. An authorized spiritual master empowered by Krishna can spread the glories of the holy name of the Lord, for he has power of attorney from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the mundane world, anyone possessing his master's power of attorney can act on behalf of his master. Similarly, a spiritual master empowered by Krishna through his own bona fide spiritual master should be considered as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. That is the meaning of Shakshadhari Tvena. So, yes, Prabhupada gives very clear, how the spiritual master's pleasure and how serving the spiritual master, can and often supersedes whatever these, so many varieties of rules and regulations that are there in the Shastra. So anyway, Kashishwara Pandit and Govinda, they did become the personal servants of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So imagine this service that they had to be with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 24/7, to be the personal servants. It's very amazing. So when apparently Kashishwara was quite well built and very, very strong. So when Mahaprabhu would go to see Lord Jagannath, of course, crowds of people would come around and they would want to get near him, want to touch his feet. So, but he would hold the crowds back. That was his service. He would keep everybody back so that nobody could touch him. And he was just very physically strong. And Govinda would walk beside Mahaprabhu and he would carry his water pot. And then, especially during Rath Yatra, when Lord Chaitanya was dancing in front of Jagannath's cart, they would form 3 rings around the Lord, and to hold people back. So the inner ring would be Lord Nityananda and others, and then the second ring was Kashishwara and Mukunda and some others, and then the third ring was Prataparudra and his subjects. So you could see there was really a real need. They need 3 rings in order to keep everybody back. Because, this is the thing in India. This is a wonderful thing that, people understand the value of getting the mercy. At least, many people do, and especially in history it's that way. Maybe it's being lost now. But, they really want mercy. I mean, they may want it for a variety of mundane reasons, but they know that you get it from the devotee, or from the Lord. They know where it comes from. So, this is a superior intelligence. Actually, not sure if I guess it's an okay thing to an example. When Tamal Krishna Maharaj departed this world in such an unexpected and sudden way, and they were transporting his body back to Mayapur, the villagers around the area, they heard that this great soul has departed, and thousands of people rushed out as they're driving along. They would not let the vehicle go by. They said, "We want final darshan. We want to touch his feet." I don't think they allowed them to touch his feet. But there was no question of proceeding further. They had to open the doors and allow people. They just wanted to bow to a saint. Is that amazing? It was wonderful, actually. It was glorious. And, yeah, so Mahaprabhu really required protection. And so that was Kashishwara. He was there all the time, taking care. And also he was the Mahaprasadam server. He was one of the 7, I guess there were 7 head people that organized the prasadam. So he was at the head of that. Like you see sometimes we go on parikrama and, or, anywhere at temples, there's some devotees that they're just the prasadam servers, that they just want to rush and serve prasadam, like most of us. I want to rush and take prasadam, but these more advanced devotees, they want to rush and serve prasadam. So that was Kashishwara. He would serve the prasadam after the kirtan, after the Rath Yatra procession. And so you imagine just the incredible mercy to have been the personal servant of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Who would not love this? But at the same time, one should understand what an exalted and difficult service this is. It's not so easy to be close, even to be the servant of the spiritual master, what to speak of Mahaprabhu. My husband, who was Srila Prabhupada's servant for quite a long time, he said that the first day, Prabhupada said, "Now your job is to just sit here and be on call 24/7, whatever. You just sit there." So this sounds really nice, but just imagine how much time we spent. I mean, at least I can speak for myself. I want to go now and do this. I want to go, have prasadam. I want to go lay down, or whatever it is I want to do. Most of us are driven, or I think some of us are driven by our own wants. So to just simply be in the service mood at every moment and to not be worrying about my own self, that's not an easy thing. That's not an easy thing. But for such exalted devotees, of course. And that's why, advanced devotees, it has to be very advanced devotees to do this. Otherwise they become familiar, or they just can't stay focused. If you're not really in servant mood, it's hard to stay focused. You have to love the master in order to do that. So really it's about love. I mean, it's what everything boils down to. To be a good servant, you really have to love the person, to serve them well, to watch, to see every moment. What do they need? This is, a servant is actually, it is the highest position to be a servant. It's not a small thing, So anyway, so this is what Kashishwara was doing in Jagannath Puri. And wonderful service, direct to Mahaprabhu, with him day and night. But meanwhile, in Vrindavan, there were really big developments happening, so much going on. Rup, Sanatan, all the 6 Goswamis, the deities are being found, they're doing the writing, they're finding holy places. And so when Rupa Goswami found Govindaji, then he began to serve him with all his heart and made so many wonderful arrangements. And I'm trying to think about, there was I listened to a class by Andrujumna recently, Andrujumna Maharaj, where he describes all what happened after Govindaji appeared in Vrindavan. It's so interesting. You should listen to those classes. He gave a series of classes about Govindaji and when Govindaji arrived. So Rupa Goswami was just immersed in the service of Govindaji, and after they found him at the Yoga Pit, and they had this elaborate celebrations, and then Rupa Goswami began organizing everything, all these amazing food offerings afterwards, and he started to have like many major festivals. I think he said something like 38 festivals a year, for every season. They would have these different festivals, some special things on Ekadashi, and he got so involved in the service of Radha Govinda that eventually he wrote to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he said, in the service of Sri Govinda Dev, my days and nights are passing like blinking of my eyes. But I am not giving proper attention and time to writing of the scriptures as you ordered. So if you can kindly send someone from Puri who can help me serve my Govindaji, then I can continue with my other sevas. So of course Mahaprabhu was so happy to receive this news that Govindaji is there and he's being served. And so naturally he wanted to send his best man to help. This is a big service, so who is the best person? So Kashishwara Pandit at that time was a pujari at a Nrsingadev temple inside the courtyard of the Jagannath temple. And, or he had been prior to that, I'm not sure if it was right at that time, but apparently he had the experience of being pujari and worshiping in the Jagannath temple. And Mahaprabhu had seen how he serves, and so he was very, very pleased with him. And apparently he sometimes worshipped even the Shila of Mahaprabhu, the one that he gave to Raghunath Das. And, in other words, he was an expert pujari. And Mahaprabhu knew that. So he requested him, please go to Vrindavan. So you can imagine if you were there participating in all the pastimes with Mahaprabhu, and he's saying, now I want you to go. So he was just, his heart broken too. He said, how can I honor your request without giving up my life? He just couldn't imagine. So Lord Chaitanya understood his heart. And so he gave him a very special deity that he said, this deity is identical to me. That deity looks like Krishna. And that deity is called Gaur Govinda, because Mahaprabhu said, I am present absolutely in this deity. So this pacified Kashishwara Pandit. And of course, it was also exciting to go to Vrindavan. So he, in the end, he happily went to Vrindavan. Along took his Gaur Govinda, and he established Gaur Govinda on the right side of Govinda Devji, where he served them with great, great love. There's a verse in Sadhana Dipika. It says, I worship Sri Kashishwara Pandit, whose power of love and devotion brought Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Western India as a deity. I'm assuming for the first time. So this is a historical event that in a deity form Mahaprabhu came there. I can't say for sure whether that was the first deity, but this this is mentioned. So it seems like Mahaprabhu coming to the western side with Kashishwara Pandit. And so he, apparently when he arrived, it seems that Rupa Goswami had already appointed Haridas Pujari as a chief priest. And so Kashishwar, he was not as much the main pujari to do the daily puja, but he set the standards for the puja. And he oversaw everything that was going on very, very nicely. And he worshipped also Rupa Goswami's, apparently he had a Shalagram Shila, and Sanatan Goswami's Govardhan Shila, and his own Gaur Govinda Dev. And so, and naturally, he became very, very dear to all of the devotees, especially to Rupa and Sanatan there. Very, very dear to everyone. And he was also responsible for establishing the cooking standards in the temple, very similar to how it's done in Puri. The dishes, the recipes, everything. And even today in Jaipur, the worship standards that were established by Kashishwara Pandit are still followed. They still do according to that. And that's where his beloved deities Gaur Govinda and Govindaji are now being lovingly adored by thousands of devotees in Jaipur, Rajasthan, every day. Amazing place. An amazing service that continued to go on. It didn't diminish, but it remained very, very wonderful. And apparently Kashishwara Pandit may have established that tradition of lighting I think it was like 50 kilos of ghee, making a ghee lamp on top of the Govinda Dev temple on every Ekadashi evening, apparently, which is something that was done in Puri, and I think to some extent that's still done there in Puri. But of course, we've all heard about how Aurangzeb saw that ghee, that light from that ghee lamp. So that tradition is prohibited now. That was, a terrible history. So that was stopped. So as far as in Vrindavan, there was Kashishwara Pandit stayed also in Sevakunj, and there was a place where he would fetch water for Gaur Govinda's service. And for this reason, it's called Pandit Koop, the place where Kashishwar came for his water. And next to that well, there used to be a baitak, or a sitting place of Kashishwar. Unfortunately, that's no longer manifest, like so many things here in Vrindavan. And, so that was his life, surrounded by these extraordinary Goswamis and in Vrindavan, and service to Govindaji, which Govindaji just seemed, he was the heart and soul of the Vrindavan devotees. And then, of course, we know that Raghunath Bhatta also came. So many of the devotees were focused on Govindaji. Raghunath Bhatta served Govindaji also, and his disciple, one of his disciples, it said that originally Rupa Goswami would worship just in the grove, Govindaji, and he would worship them with, there's a word for it. It means like the natural elements, like just the flowers and the leaves and whatever you could find there. And but then a little later, Raghunath Bhatta's disciple, he made a smaller temple where Govindaji stayed for maybe 50 years or so. And that temple apparently, although I never saw it, was apparently there in Vrindavan until like 10 years ago. And then some crazy person tore it down to build a school, and that person is now in jail because that was a historic site. It was not meant to be torn down. And then later, the big, the temple that we know of, the awesome, gigantic temple of Govindaji was built. But then Kashishwara, he had a number of very exalted disciples, and one of his famous disciples, Sri Govinda Gosai, became the Pujari of Govindaji after Kashishwara. And Krishnadas Kaviraj mentions that there was no servant more dear to the Govinda deity than this Govinda Gosai. And then as far as Kashishwara's Pandit's departure, I don't know any specifics, but we do know that his samadhi is there, and I believe it's his full body samadhi is very appropriately right next to Govindaji temple in the 64 samadhi area, right there next to Govindaji. And it is mentioned in Gaur Ganadesh Dipika that he was, there's two, he was Shashi Rekha or Bringara in Braj Leela. So in any case, he is an eternal associate of the Supreme Lord. So what an extraordinary personality. So we'll finish there. It's a little bit maybe too long, but hopefully I will go on now and speak about Bhugarbha Goswami. So we'll hopefully continue on for a little bit longer to talk about Bhugarbha Goswami. Probably, devotees may be less familiar with Bhugarbha because there's not a lot written about him, but he is an extremely important personality in our Gaudiya lineage. And Bhugarbha and Kashishwara have a strong connection in service to Govindaji. There's a verse about Bhugarbha that says, I revere the illustrious Bhugarbha Prabhu, who is said to have been born from the bowels of the earth. We'll talk about that later. He bestows love of Krishna, and he delights in the service of Govinda Dev. He is compassionate, simple, and always joyful. So this is a description of Bhugarbha. So you see how he is also closely connected with Govindaji. That, the Govindaji deity was really the heart of the Gaudiya community for, generation after generation. It's described in, Krishnadas Kaviraj describes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita the mood of the service of Govindaji. I'll read that, a verse that he's written about Govindaji. In that temple of Govindaji, thousands of servitors always render service to the Lord in devotion. Even with thousands of mouths, one could not describe this service. And then Krishnadas Kaviraj goes on to describe the exalted nature of many of the servants who cared for the Lord. And Kashishwara and Bhugarbha are mentioned by him, so they were important servants of Govindaji. And he gives a glorious description of the chief servitor, also Sri Haridas Pandit, who was a disciple of Ananta Acharya, who Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says was Sudevi. And he's also the person who established the Ganga Mata Mat in Puri. Then Krishnadas Kaviraj goes on. In other words, he's glorifying, he's explaining how glorious are the pujaris and the servants of Govindaji. He mentions also Govinda Gosai, which I mentioned, Kashishwara Goswami's disciple. And that also, he also mentions Bhugarbha's disciple, Chaitanya Das, who is also a priest of the Govinda deity. So you see how they were all working together to serve the Lord, and how they trained their disciples to continue on with that service. And so you get the drift from this descriptions by Krishnadas Kaviraj that, Govindaji's servants and his pujaris were of the highest caliber of devotees. It was not just, simple new people or something. It was really these elevated servants were doing the intimate, personal, direct service to the Lord, because this deity seva, it's what we do in the spiritual world. So it is a very exalted service. And it's so interesting in this sense to think about Srila Prabhupada. The magnitude of his mercy in the early days of ISKCON. If we just see how really he engaged so many young ladies as the head pujaris of our temples. What mercy. It's just an extraordinary history, what Srila Prabhupada did for us. We hope we will not let him down. It was one of his big concerns, was whether the deity worship would go on properly in his absence. And you see in Vrindavan, there's all these lineages that continue on with the service. We have to also do like that. Very, very, very important. So anyway, this is, in this way, Bhugarbha and Kashishwara, they were one in heart in the service of Radha Govinda. And of course, Bhugarbha came to Vrindavan quite a bit before Kashishwara, but they were bonded through this service. And really, this is really a key to creating close, tight bonds of love with other devotees, is through service rendered to the deity together. I mean, I don't know. I think of people that I served with in the early days as a pujari, and you just don't forget. You just have some kind of special bond. It just never goes away, that you've served the Lord together. When you work to try to really do something nice, make a nice offering, make a nice outfit. And, this makes us love each other, and it has to be that way. How can we serve the Lord without it being pleasing to Him by the loving relationships and reciprocations that are all going on around that? So the early life, as far as Bhugarbha's early life, well, I haven't seen anything. The only thing that it is mentioned in Sadhana Dipika, that Bhugarbha was actually the Lokanath Goswami's paternal uncle. So, maybe he was a little bit older, but I don't think he would have been much older than Lokanath. And Lokanath was maybe a little bit older than Mahaprabhu. I always try to figure out the ages and dates, but it's not easy. But we do know that Lokanath was from Jeshore in Bangladesh, so possibly Bhugarbha may have come from that area also, but that's just a speculation. But we do know that Lokanath and Bhugarbha were the closest friends and constant companions throughout their entire life. In Bhakti Ratnakar, it's said that they were one in heart and mind. Lifelong friendships, lifelong relationship. Such a nice example. How loving relationships, Vaishnava relationships, can be a shelter for our whole life. And I have seen now over 50 years, friendships that are very deep through service, through rendering service together, and that how that enriches our life and how that keeps us going and how important it is. So as far as Bhugarbha Goswami, we know that his initiating guru was Gadadhar Pandit. I don't know when, where that took place, but he is therefore considered to be the Gadadhar's branch of the Chaitanya tree. And also another friend that it's mentioned, Sri Bhagavat Das, was a fellow disciple of also of Gadadhar Pandit, and was a very close friend also with Bhugarbha, and that he also came and spent the rest of his life in Vrindavan. Although I'm not familiar Bhagavat Das, but it is mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. But we do know that Bhugarbha, when Lokanath Goswami came first to, he was living distant from Mahaprabhu for some time, and then it was always his intention that he would come and he would be in Navadvip and he would just stay the rest of his life and serve Mahaprabhu. That was his goal, that was his intention. And so finally he orchestrated those things to happen. And so he arrived there so happily in Navadvip and met with Mahaprabhu, thinking, this is where I'm going to be the rest of my life, so happy. And then Mahaprabhu shocked him and immediately gave him a different mission. And he said, go live in Vrindavan. Now there was nothing there, or very little there, let's say. And he said, but I'll meet you there later. And Lokanath was just shocked. He was torn. He was torn in so many ways, like, leave Mahaprabhu. How? It will break my heart. And then go to Vrindavan? What is there? There's nothing there. It's so far. It will be so difficult. And you have to think like you're being given this mission. And then how hard that's going to be. It reminds me of like when Prabhupada sometimes would just say, okay, apparently there was one time when they were, some devotees were on the train with him, going happily, traveling with Prabhupada, and then when the train stopped, he said, okay, you should get off now, and you should open a temple here. What? No, we want to go with you. But they did it. And, examples like Tamal Krishna Maharaj, no, you should just go to China. Just go to China. No, but Prabhupada, I want to stay with you, No, go to China. So this mission, but this, you can't compare anything to it. He was going to walk across the entire country and go to a jungle where nothing is there and begin a mission. Wow. That was big, and he was in so much distress. And apparently, Mahaprabhu gave some indication to him also that he was going to take sannyas soon, and he was completely mortified to hear that. And the idea of him shaving his head and going off in the forest, the whole thing was just too much, and he was crying. And, Lord Chaitanya did everything, embraced him and consoled him, and he explained how dear this Vrindavan is, how dear this project is to his heart. But still, Lokanath was, I don't want to go. And but then Mahaprabhu said, but this will make me happy. And that was the clincher. Well, yeah. We're not about our own gratification. We're about pleasing. And he thought, well, if my pain is going to be your pleasure, then so be it. So of course he surrendered. And what an example of this highest mood of devotion, to just surrender like that. But Bhugarbha Goswami was there when this was transpiring, when this exchange was happening. And he saw how unhappy was Lokanath. And so he just, well, I'll go with you. He volunteered to accompany him to Vrindavan. Wow. Now that's a real friend, not a fair weather friend. Oh, I'm staying here. Yeah, you can go. But this was a time of need. He saw, wow, this is going to be big. This is going to be difficult. And just see how distressing it is for him. So he volunteered. So that is a nature. we see something about the nature of Bhugarbha Goswami. What a nice person. So off they went, the two companions, and walking through the jungles across the entire country. They went through Ayodhya and Lucknow, and they went through many holy places, and finally arriving in Vrindavan. And, you know, although they were fully following the order of the Lord, they were constantly in intense separation, you know, crying, missing him so much. And, you know, but they were so lucky they had each other. And there is one sloka that states that Bhugarbha, he only wanted to talk about Lord Chaitanya. So, you know, this is the process. This is how when the heart is aching and you're in pain and you're feeling separation, then the process is just keep talking about the Lord. So that was Bhugarbha. He just wanted to talk about Lord Chaitanya. And in this way, one, you know, feels the presence of the Lord while he's speaking. Actually, I understand this to some extent in regards to, you know, when Srila Prabhupada departed here in Sri Vrindavan Dham, the following day, you know, devotees were lost. Just lost what to do. And so devotees began to gather in the temple room. And I don't think it was a planned program, but what ensued was that everybody just started talking about Prabhupada. One person after another took the microphone and just on, and it was just bliss. And, you know, we could feel that this is all we can do. This is how we're going to keep feeling Prabhupada. We just have to keep talking about him, you know. And when we are, we're happy, you know. So this was a practical experience of how to soothe the heart by just talking about the Lord, the Lord's pastimes, or his devotees. And then everything becomes tolerable. So they arrived there. They arrive in Vrindavan to this dense forest, and what a mission they had. From nothing, they were supposed to create a foundation for sharing Krishna Bhakti everywhere. I mean, this was their mission. Find the holy places, install deities. How? Only by full surrender, you know, crying out. It's said that they used to cry out, "Oh, Vamsi Vat, where are you?" All these different... I mean, there were some devotees there, as far as I understand. Subhuti Roy must have been there before them. But, you know, there really wasn't much, you know. So, such an extraordinary time in Vrindavan, you know, that... They just performed extraordinary service, that it was excruciatingly difficult materially and spiritually, because materially, you know, it was just sort of a deserted place for centuries. There had been invasions and desecration of rulers. It was a wild forest, and most of the holy places were not, you know, had been covered over. So, you know, materially, it was difficult. And spiritually, they were far away from Mahaprabhu and all the devotees. And so, you know, it's a struggle to build a mission. But Lokanath and Bhugarbha were inseparable associates, and they did that together. And they were close because they shared the mission together, you know. So there really is nothing that makes people closer than doing the mission together. You talk to Sankirtan devotees, you know, when you go out together out into that dark world and you're with other Sankirtan devotees, you really bond. You know, so this was the early days of the mission. And they didn't know how is this going to unfold, what they're really doing, what, you know, how Vrindavan will develop. There was no, like, structured plan. They didn't know. They just had to have faith This is what Mahaprabhu wants me to do, I just do it. I mean, it's just extraordinary. The early days of the mission, it's sort of like when Prabhupada came in the early days, it was also excruciatingly difficult, how Prabhupada was, alone. He didn't have, Lokanath Goswami. I mean, he had in his heart, but alone, no money, no place, nowhere to even bathe or eat, a cold, dark, hellish place. What it's like to establish a mission. What Prabhupada did. Unbelievable. And also early devotees, the kind of austerities, the kind of things that you have to do to establish a mission. You have to do, So, even though Bhugarbha and Lokanath, they were renounced people, they didn't need much, but, even to fulfill the mission of the Lord, some facilities are required, so it's not easy. So everyone that started to come afterwards, they had great, great respect and great appreciation for these pioneers and what they did in those difficult days, very difficult days. So, we also have to feel gratitude for those who did this, as Kashishwara, all those Goswamis, and what to speak of also our own mission, our own, people that have done extraordinary austerities to establish this mission. I mean, now things are pretty cushy, things are handed on a sort of silver platter in some ways. Temples are there, deities are there, books are there, everything, So, at least we need to feel gratitude for these people that were willing to go, to do the hard work, to establish it. So then, while they were there, though, at some point they heard the news that Mahaprabhu had taken sannyas and gone to Puri, and then he'd gone south on pilgrimage. So it's like they were like in the madness of separation. They're like, oh, we have to go see him, So as far as I know, Bhugarbha and Lokanath, they traveled way down the south. They tried to find Mahaprabhu. And then Mahaprabhu had gone to Vrindavan, like he said he was going to meet them there, and they weren't there. Can you imagine? Oh, my goodness. All the way down south, back, walking. And then when they get back to Vrindavan, they rushed back to Vrindavan, then they realized their mistake, and then they heard that Mahaprabhu had gone off to Prayag, and so they're just, we're going to keep going, and then eventually Lokanath had a dream, and Mahaprabhu said, no, you stay there. And he pacified. I don't know, it was Lokanath that I know of that had a dream, and that he instructed them that you stay there. And even though that instruction was maybe more difficult than death, far away from the Lord, carrying out his instructions, just by carrying the Lord in their heart. And they never got the association of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu again. They never did. Wow. But we know, still, always having his association in their heart, so this is that mood, the Vipralambha Bhava of Mahaprabhu's mission. We see so much of this spirit of separation, that there's nothing they would rather do than to run off to Puri and be with the Lord, but his order was to stay, so they never saw him again. So this service and separation, it provides actually very intimate inner association. And of course, not long afterwards, Rupa, Sanata, and so many of the Lord's associates came, and Braj became alive with all these extraordinary activities going on, and great devotees there. And Rupa Goswami was caring then for all the devotees. He even got cows so that the devotees could have milk. And, so the big service was started, but had Lokanath and Bhugarbha not gone there, none of that. They set the foundation, so that then things started to happen. Such a big service they were entrusted with. So we are very indebted to them. And they were seen, as the senior most there. They were respected by age and by experience, highly respected. So, you would think, well, why don't we know more about them? Because they were just averse to name and fame. And they just forbid, don't talk about us. Don't, they just didn't want to, So then, of course, we know that later Loknath became the spiritual master of Narottam Das Thakur. So no doubt Narottam Das Thakur had much association and love for Bhugarbha also as the best friend of his spiritual master. And he mentions him in his songs. There's one song where he sings, "O Hari, why am I addicted to this abominable path of karma? I didn't worship Radha Govinda in Braj, even one iota, nor could I understand the position of spontaneous devotion, Ragamarg. Svarup Damodar, Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Bhugarbha Goswami, Jiva Goswami. I have never offered a drop of service to their lotus feet. How then shall I attain the goal? Not only have I failed to take advantage of the association of all these great souls, but I have also neglected their associates and followers. What a sad story my life has become. My life and birth are all useless. Shame on me. Alas, alas. Thus laments Narottam Das." Of course, this is the mood of a very exalted devotee. But for us, it's the real story, is what a sad story it is if we do not take association of the devotees. Yes. So it's described in Bhakti-Ratnakar that Lokanath's affection for Bhugarbha was really well known to everywhere, that they were only different in bodies. In spirit, they were one. So how wonderful they showed the Vaishnava ideal, and they were both called gold mines of virtue. So they showed real friendship in spiritual life, and how, with Krishna in the center, there's no ego and no material competitiveness or selfishness. How wonderful. And also Bhugarbha, his life example, one thing about him is that he really he was one of those people that really wanted to avoid distraction. We all know that in spiritual life, especially now, there is so much distraction from our goal, so many possibilities for distraction, and that we know that succumbing to any of these multifarious varieties of material pleasure, wealth, prestige, fame, power, whatever, it keeps us from experiencing the real bliss of spiritual life. So therefore we see that there are some saints that they really strictly avoid worldly fame and association, like Gorkishore Das Babaji, who did bhajan near a toilet place or something just so nobody would come near. And of course, we are not to imitate these things, but it's an inspiration to see how they just abhor material power, distractions, or anything, And Bhugarbha was of this kind. And to avoid material distractions, he really liked to perform his bhajan in caves. And that's Bhugarbha. Bu means earth, and Garbha means cave or hidden place. So Bhugarbha, he liked to be in the hidden places. So imagine, he wanted to avoid distraction at that time. What was there even to be distracted by? Now we have so much temptation. What a challenge. And we really can't hide in a cave But we can take the inspiration to try our best to carefully guard against the bombardment of the negative forces so we can practice spiritual life sincerely. So it takes some effort and a practical plan how to minimize bad association, how to, have adequate meditative time. That is what yoga, especially bhakti yoga, is about. So in this, Bhugarbha showed us the key, not just about going into a cave, but the key to avoiding distraction and staying inspired is not just to hide away, but more important is association with like-minded seekers. So that is exactly what Bhugarbha, he always got together with Lokanath and others, and in that way he could avoid anything, and that is for us. That's a big lesson that Srila Prabhupada always encouraged us, that we need to stay in the association of devotees, and that is a key to sticking on the path. And that Prabhupada used to use that example that like a bundle of sticks, it gets stronger and it's harder to break, but one stick alone, it's easy. So this is a purpose. This is why Prabhupada made a society, for this purpose. So we do know that that Bhugarbha had his own deities, Radha Chalchika. I believe that the Chalchika means like playful or naughty, which is really cute. And those deities are at the Radha Damodar temple. I'm not sure if those are Pratibhu deities or if they are the original deities. I don't know. But apparently there used to be a Chalchika Kunj where they were worshipped, and then later they were brought to Radha Damodar. And his bhajan stali was in Kadirvan, near Lokanath. Lokanath in Amrao was in Amrao on the banks of Kishori Kund, where Radha Vinod appeared to him. So they would, go back and forth and see each other, sort of like Rupa and Sanata. They were nearby. They had their bhajan stalis separate, but they were close enough. They were walking distance. So they would take association. So Bhugarbha, he is said to be the 11th branch of Gadadhar Pandit, and his samadhi, all of you have seen in the Radha Damodar courtyard, right next to Rupa Goswami. So you imagine to be placed there, what an important personality he was. That is a very honored spot, right next to Sri Rupa Goswami. As you're going around on the Parikrama, there's a little samadhi in the corner, and you go back around. Now, it's very odd because in recent years that samadhi was made smaller. I don't know why, but it's kind of odd. But anyway, next time any of you have the opportunity to go around and meditate on Bhugarbha Goswami and the amazing role that he played, in unfolding Mahaprabhu's mission. We're just extremely indebted to such personalities. And we can pray to them for their mercy, that whatever small difficulties that we have in our practice, which comparatively seem like ridiculously small, that seem like mountains to us, but really are very small, that we can gracefully endure whatever difficulties we have to undergo and continue with determination in our service in Mahaprabhu's mission. So I think I went on a little bit too long, but let me end there. These two great personalities, let us meditate on them today and say thank you from the bottom of our heart that you have done what you did so we can be where we are now. Hare Krishna.